are entering the Take Up, a place to gather when the film is over. I'm your host, Joshua Ray, and I'm here with my co-host and the managing editor of thetakeup.com, Andrew Wyatt. Hey, Andrew.
Hello.
Today we are processing Escape from Alcatraz. That's Andrew's pick for the Cinema Speculation Program. First, we're going to talk now showing, and then I've got a little game of Quentin Tarantino quotes. Finally, we'll have just one more thing. Are you caught up with DC films? Like, did you ever really follow them? I know you reviewed a few of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think both my enthusiasm for Marvel and DC is at absolute lowest ebb right now, but I'm pretty sure that DC fell off first, if that makes sense.
Or was there ever an ebb? Like, I mean,
I'm a person who thinks that there have been no like truly excellent DC films. You know, I had very, very mixed feelings about, like, depending on how you define DC, like there's weird things like Joker that don't really stand within the DCEU, I guess.
Yeah. The latest. I mean, we're not talking Burton Batman here, right?
No. So I have deeply mixed feelings about all of them, weird one-offs like Joker included. I'm also one of those weird people who will, like, if people really hate on the Zack Snyder films, I'll like try to defend them because I think they're weird enough that, like, we don't get enough weirdness in superhero movies, and I think they're weird enough that we need a little bit of defense of that. My favorite DC film is still Birds of Prey, so I don't know what that says about me.
That you are for women and only women. And
no, it's funny. It's
that.
Funny and it's fun. That's all I ask of a superhero.
I think Margot Robbie is really great as Harley Quinn. This is all to say, Blue Beetle, like, you don't need any DC context. It's just a DC property. I think Batman comes up in a joke once, and well, because I don't follow it and I don't know. There might be other things happening in it that are related to other DC properties, but I didn't know. It's a fine film. No, it's not. It's like halfway boring, halfway interesting, and like has its foot on both of these things at the same time, which means it just spins and spins and doesn't do much. Susan Sarandon's the villain. George Lopez plays the characters. Now, what's the actor who plays the Blue Beetle?
This is Xolo Maridueña.
Yeah.
Twin Peaks fans will recognize him as the teenage boy from the 1950 segment of episode 8 of Twin Peaks.
He drops Sarah Palmer off. That's Sarah Palmer.
Yeah.
If you've
he's also been on
history,
a lot of,
you know that.
He's also been on a lot of television, but I think this is like his first, not only one of his first movie roles, but first obviously leading role.
And he's very charming and very affecting. And that's important to note because it is sort of an emo slant on superhero lore in that it follows all the same steps, except you have this really great nuclear family unit with the family. And they're a Mexican family living in Florida Keys, I guess, and it's some kind of like made up metropolis that is supposed to represent Miami, and it looks to me that it was filmed in Miami. I did not look into it because I have not thought about this film after watching it, and that's the part of the film that's charming and really heartfelt, and you kind of wish it would focus more on that, but then it probably wouldn't be a superhero film at all.
There has to be a big blowing up things climax involved in the third act, right?
And there are a lot of things getting blown up, and a lot of it is kind of gestures towards the immigrant experience in the United States, specifically Hispanic or Latinx experience on borders. And it just gestures towards those things, which is, I guess, fine. You know, they've got to make money. You know, it can't be a complete polemic property, but yeah, I don't know. It's really kind of an uninteresting entry, other than the stuff about the family.
Yeah, I mean, like that aside, I haven't seen it, but that aside, like that was the only aspect of it that didn't look hideously generic to me.
And that you say that hideously generic is the film's aesthetic.
Ugh.
I mean, talk about like just looking like the lowest common denominator television. And yes, I know there's great TV, great looking TV out there, but this thing is just kind of really blown out and ugly looking digital ugliness. Yeah. And I think it's a unseated Barbie for a weekend, but we'll see how this weekend fares for all that.
Well, and it's a little bit of a shame just because, again, this is not an actor who's had a lot of opportunities up till now to be in a sort of leading role. And, the whole thing is kind of getting, independent of what you're saying about the quality of it, which doesn't sound that great, the whole thing is kind of mired in this weird limbo that the DC properties are in right now, where they're trying to transition and do a hard reset or something. Like, I'm not immersed enough
Which it
in.
seems they've done many times because they
Yeah,
just
I don't
really
know.
haven't gotten it right.
I don't know. It's just kind of a shame that, like, that the film where you have an unknown actor who potentially this could make his career, plus you have Latinx representation. That's the film that's going to sort of, it's really tanking from what I understand, is in terms of like what they expected it to do. But that's been like the track record with all the DC films in the past year or two, I think. So I
And
don't
I
know.
think
It's in a
I
weird
think
place.
you can see this trend in all superheroes. I think the things have finally kind of run their course, and maybe from that we'll get some more original, more adventurous filmmaking
Mm.
out of these things. Yeah, like let Sam Raimi do another one. I liked that.
Did
That
you
was
like I
fun.
have not seen the last Doctor Strange. Did you like it?
Hell yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it's a tried and true Marvel, but it's also, you could say the same of it being a Sam Raimi movie
Mm-hmm.
because that thing gets wild. And it's a lot of fun. Yeah. What was the next?
Well, what
What
else
was
have we
the
seen?
one you were going to talk about?
Between Two Worlds is the film I saw this past week. This is a French film with starring Juliette Binoche. She's literally the only recognizable name in the credits, because the rest of the cast is entirely made up of non-professional actors, which
Mm.
can be a good bad thing, but in this case it works out really well.
Oh, good.
Everybody holds their own across the aisle from one of the greatest French living actors. So this is directed by Emmanuel Carrère, who I think he's a multi hyphenate writer, director, author, playwright, I think, but he's probably most famous in terms of film circles for directing The Mustache from 2006, I think, which is sort of his last feature. So he's been in the sort of not out there directing movies, been doing other things for a while. He writes novels too, I think. And this is his adaptation of a nonfiction book written by a famous French investigative journalist about her time sort of going undercover with janitorial staff in a coastal city in northwestern France, specifically cleaning on the English Channel ferry that goes back and forth between Britain and France, and cleaning it in a sort of frenzy in the small window between it making port and then leaving again every multiple times a day. So this is sort of a fictionalized adaptation of that nonfiction book, and Juliette Binoche is playing the role of the investigative reporter. It's okay. I think it's a deeply confused work about what it wants to be. Juliette Binoche, always great. She's great in everything. Even when the movie's bad, she's great. So it's not about her. It's not about the other actors, the performers, who are, is my understanding, are drawn from the local people, and they all do really good, especially the sort of the secondary, probably the closest to a secondary character after Juliette Binoche's name, which is this woman she befriends. I want to get her name right. Sorry, pausing here so I can make sure I'm crediting people correctly.
Yeah.
Helene Lambert, who plays Christelle, who becomes sort of Juliette Binoche's friend in this janitorial cleaning lady community, the closest thing she has to a friend. She's exceptional. She has this kind of Chloe Sevigny gravitas intensity about her, which I really like. And she holds her own against Juliette Binoche really nicely. And I don't know, the film is a little confused. On the one hand, it wants to be this sort of Ken Loach style, let's put you down in the sort of misery of the people wobbling on the poverty line and see their experiences. And Ken Loach is probably the most famous, I guess, English language filmmaker who does that. But he's good at it. Whatever you can say about sort of his tendency toward miserableism, he's good at it. And he treats it with absolute sincerity and conviction. He's very interested in the plight of the working poor and labor rights and so forth. this film feels like it's getting so distracted by the investigative journalism plot. It might be a situation where having Binoche in the lead actually works against the film because her personality is so intense and enormous
Yes.
that
Yeah.
like it draws attention. I mean, no matter how good the other actors are, and they're to their credit, they're quite good. It's always pulling away that, oh no, this is a movie about this woman's inner turmoil, and it's sort of pulling
Yeah.
that focus away.
That's what the effect Nomadland has on me, especially when she's in the communities of, you know, nomadic, unhoused folks who are
Mhm.
traveling, and nomadic travelers. Great, Josh. Um, those people are reported to be, you know, real nomads. And of course, you have two-time, at this point, Academy Award-winning actress doing the same. And there's always that tension between, you know, hyper real and being aware of the performance and
Mhm.
aware that it is a performance. And
I can't explain why it doesn't bother me there. Maybe because everybody sort of knows that it's a fiction. It's a 100% fictional story about real issues. Whereas
yeah.
this they're trying to dramatize something that really happened. I don't know.
Well, speaking of something that really happened, let's talk about Ira Sachs' passages.
Oh yeah, I need to hear the
I
skinny on this.
only say that because I am a queer polyamorous person, so this movie felt like a direct attack. Passages is about a filmmaker played by Franz Rogowski, who I think you and I both agree is like one of the great
Yeah.
actors. And he is married to Ben Whishaw, who's a printmaker of some note, but of course not to the level of a great film director.
Mhm.
And the film director is an asshole, is, you know, uses his creativity as an excuse to behave badly. And he's just kind of rambunctious and mercurial. Fuck.
Mhm.
So he has a one night stand with an elementary school teacher played by Adele Exarchopoulos. And so you right there, you've got a recommendation. These three great actors playing this, you know, menage a trois, if you will, of but the film more focuses on the effect that this central figure has on these two people
Mhm.
in sort of playing a game of tennis with their emotions and future. And I don't want to say that it is representative of like the way these, and it really isn't a polyamorous relationship until they try that out later in the film. But the film, it has a very kind of literal title in the structure of it, in that you get these just short ellipses of maybe a couple of years in the lives of these three
Mhm.
people, and the kind of makeshift triangle, it's not a very stable triangle, that they have going on. It is probably appropriately rated NC-17. That's been of some note, I guess, because we don't really get that anymore. It is to an extent a sexy film. I didn't the sex in it isn't very sexy. It's actually very matter of fact, but you still get these very attractive people um fucking in it. So, and it's pretty explicit
Yeah,
too.
I'm I'm one of these people who thinks that the sexiness of a movie often has nothing to do with its actual portrayal of the act. Like
Well, we're decision to leave people. I don't think there's actual sex in decision to leave.
no,
And it's like the sexiest thing anyone can ever do is bury themselves in sand to commit suicide.
right. I
but but it is, you
spoiler.
know, oh yeah, you know, fast forward 30 seconds ago. Anyway,
Right on the button there, Josh.
yeah, right on the button. So I don't really know what this film is after, other than just a portrait of this person. And it really does center on him. It's very rare that you get in with the other two people without him. Really, there's just one scene, one very pivotal scene of Ben Whishaw and Adele Exarchopoulos having a conversation. And it's,
Mhm.
you're, when you watch it, you're like, ah, man, maybe I want more of this because there is only this one scene of it. And it's just so crucial and it's so incredible to see them together. Otherwise, I think it's fine. I don't think it's one of the better films of the year. I think it's a fine Ira Sachs movie. I tend
Yeah,
to think that he's a little bit overrated.
Yeah, how do you feel about Ira Sachs in general?
This is among his more polished works, which you've seen in the past 15 years. Anything from what Married Life and on is really taken on a sheen of important indie film, whereas earlier works like The Delta or 40 Shades of Blue are a little bit more rough hewn, and that gives them a really excellent texture. And this one, oh, let me tell you though, just the catalog of looks that it is. Every time the scene changed and Franz Rogowski was wearing this really loose knit cut off sweater, I was like, there are dresses that Exarchopoulos wears in this. I'm like, I want dress. Like, she looks so gorgeous that I think I would put that dress on.
So maybe that's the better recommendation for this movie. If you want to
Oh
see
my God.
beautiful people in a like horrible situation in a melodrama.
Yeah, and horny, and there's plenty of things you never thought you would see. So I went with one of my guys, and he was unaware that Ben Whishaw voiced Paddington.
Oh dear, that like changes view of Paddington forever.
Absolutely, you see a lot of Paddington. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of like a mild recommendation from me. A film I can appreciate. I think a lot of folks have really responded to it. I thought it was fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine. You know what's better than fine? Escape from Alcatraz.
Yes.
All right.
Alcatraz, the Rock. No one has ever escaped from this prison. This is Frank Morris. Armed robbery, burglary, grand larceny. Morris has escaped from many prisons, but Alcatraz could be the exception.
I smell something burning.
I'm looking for a new punk.
Good luck.
All right. So this is our third episode on cinema speculation. That's Quentin Tarantino's film essay memoir, tracking some important new Hollywood films and independent films from 1970s. This one's a big one.
Yeah.
This one's a pretty big one. A very successful film with a big star, and it's Escape from Alcatraz. That's Don Siegel's 1979. What? I guess it's a thriller. Sure.
Yeah.
I certainly find it thrilling.
Prison escape film is sort of its own subgenre, right?
Yeah. So it's based on a true story.
Ostensibly.
Maybe, sort of. Right. Where then they keep the name. The Frank Morris character was an inmate in Alcatraz, and there was 4 men who broke out, and no one really knows what happened to them.
They're dead. They're dead. We can say that they're dead.
Well, at this point, they're certainly dead. But
this is the DB Cooper thing. Like, the mystery is not really a mystery. They're dead.
Yeah, the DB Cooper's like bones up in a tree. Yeah, they are at the bottom of the bay for sure.
But that's not important to what this film is doing.
It isn't important. No, I don't think so. Do you want to set up what the film is doing with this story?
Sure. So Don Siegel, who we can talk a little bit about, I want to save Tarantino's dissection of it for later, but this is sort of like, I guess the not the last maybe, but I'm sorry, I'm fumbling the history here. He maybe not the last, but certainly maybe like the bookend of a prosperous period of Clint Eastwood, Don Siegel collaboration.
This is their final collaboration, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for doing the history that I didn't know. I'm sure Tarantino brought it up, but I've already my mind has already lost it. So this film is sort of resolutely focused on the act of escape, and it follows Clint Eastwood's character Frank Morris basically arriving at Alcatraz. It has a remarkable sort of wordless opening sequence, or mostly wordless opening sequence, about his arrival via boat to Alcatraz. And I should clarify that the film takes place in 1960, only a few years before Alcatraz closed forever as a prison. So he's sort of in the sunset. He's arriving at Alcatraz in sort of its last few years. And, depending on who you talk to, whether or not this particular escape may have been integral to causing its closure. But
it seems like there were a lot of reasons for them to close Alcatraz. But as far as the public is concerned, people escaping from it and them becoming folk heroes because of that is probably a good reason.
So the film sort of just follows, ruthlessly follows Frank's experience from his arrival through getting used to the environment and the peculiarities of Alcatraz, independent even of other federal prisons, and the routines and learning sort of the community with the other inmate, learning to suss out who the people are. But I think what's important to point out about Frank's character and I think this is the essence of the film, is that Frank is planning to escape from the moment he arrives.
He's got it in his head. I don't care what other prison you're taking me to. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We need to pause. My cat is making a ruckus.
Oh, you're good. I don't hear it, but that doesn't mean anything.
What? What is the problem?
He doesn't understand that.
He normally doesn't care when I'm in here on the podcast. So I don't know what.
Well, it's probably because there's no one else out there.
No.
Oh, you said Wendy's back.
Yeah, usually Sunday he's just chilling in the poof or something. I'm sorry. So let's
chilling in the poof like Franz Rogowski.
No. My gigantic beanbag I have. He sits dead in the center of it. 90% of the space on the beanbag is not used, and he's just sitting in the center of it,
cat,
like a little Ottoman sultan or something.
Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, let's rewind a little
bit. You were saying he's arriving, having decided to escape.
Yeah, and I think the film, as far as I can tell, follows Frank's perspective 100%. There's no scenes that Eastwood is not in. It's all about Frank's sort of journey through this system and then out the other end in a non-traditional way. And it's very much focused on process and Frank's sort of savvy negotiation. We learn, we don't see anything of his life of crime. We don't see anything of his time in previous prisons. We just know that he's sort of a recidivist. They give him a cleverly sort of violent, but not quite objectionably violent criminal past. He's in federal prison for carjacking, which doesn't even really make sense to me, but he's just enough savvy about this world that he can sort of play people off of each other and negotiate relationships and friendships with the right inmates and win over trust of the right guards and so forth to negotiate this escape that he's planning pretty much from day one.
Can we take a second to talk about the opening? And I know you want to wait on Tarantino's thoughts about it, but Tarantino said some great things about it. I like how he compares this sudden lightning strike, because while he's arriving, it's raining and there's a big lightning strike, and he calls it Bava-esque. And I thought that was that way too, because I was like, oh, this film's going to be a lot more sort of stylized than I expected. Yeah. And not really. This is sort of just a one note, very...
But there's an atmosphere. I do think there's an atmosphere. I think you're right. It's not
building an atmosphere.
It's not a very stylized film, but there is building an atmosphere. A lot of people talk about Val Newton influencing Scorsese for Shutter Island, but I'm 90% convinced that he was also thinking about this opening with the opening sort of movement of Shutter Island. It's moody, and it gets you, and the fact that Frank really isn't talking, some of the guards say things to him, and he's just sort of going through the clinical procedure. In some ways, it's a procedural, that opening 10 minutes is a procedural about federal prison process. We're watching what he has to go through to get there.
But it's also important that the film is titled Escape from Alcatraz.
Right.
So it is referencing that. So, and you are watching Clint Eastwood, maybe the tiniest bit past his prime, meaning what, 40 something, and he is in
for his second and third renaissance.
Right, exactly, and fourth and fifth, and go retire, sir. Yeah. He is in just peak physical condition, and they parade him, and he's very stoic about it. They take him to his cell completely butt ass naked. Almost said naked.
And Tarantino has a point about this in his book, that he thinks that it's the kind of thing that Eastwood might not have done for himself at that age. That Siegel is the only director who can necessarily shoot him like that.
Yeah,
at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, certainly possible, but I mean, he should have no shame about that at that particular moment, is what I will say. But it's interesting because it's like he's just come out of the primordial soup, like just this Promethean figure, like, oh, I'm Clint Eastwood walking into this. But as you're saying, like, he's just this figure that you're watching move through the system very stoically, but also very observant.
Yeah, he's constantly looking and taking note of what he's seeing around him and filing all that information away for future reference.
Right. And he's learning, you're getting bits of the certain other inmates too. Some are whistling, some of them are just set back in their cells. But it's a very gripping first 10 minutes or so. That was it.
So I think one of the things that this film does exceptionally well is focus, like I said, so relentlessly on process. Siegel has, famously made a couple prison pictures, including the great 1950s picture Riot on Cell Block 11. But that film is it's a good,
very different.
Yeah, it's a good, great sort of 1950s drama, prison drama, but it is much more of like I don't want to say a polemic, because that sort of undercuts how much it works as sort of an action thriller film. But it really is a film about the prison system and about like the men the men who are there, like, feeling as if they are being dehumanized and what they're going to do about it.
It's Spare in a very different way. I mean, it's weird to call Don Siegel's film Spare, but aesthetically so. And, as far as dialogue and characterization, I mean, that film opens on newsreel footage. So it is taking, like, this is happening, spreading across the country, and they're showing like real footage of prison riots, and with this narrator who's like a newsreel narrator, and then it sort of transitions into the fiction film that we're watching. But you don't get the sort of characterization that you would get in this. Like, you're not tied to these people in a way that, like, you're emotionally connected or invested in what they're doing. I mean, you're invested in what they're doing because it is sort of like moving pieces on a chessboard, thrilling. And that's a really short movie too. I'd recommend for anyone. I think it's on Criterion disc.
Like an hour long.
Yeah.
Long.
But this film is Spare in a different way, because you're not getting someone who's like a verbose character. I mean, Eastwood would never, I guess. You're just getting really his observation, like what he pays attention to. You really don't understand what his plan is, although you are watching him piece things together. And so I thought, I watched this for the first time for this, and I'm like, am I stupid? Am I missing things? I did that thing. I'm like, no, you're just getting the information that you should be getting. And eventually you're going to get caught up when you need to get caught up, because that's the experience of the other inmates too. Even though you're locked with him, like, you're not going to get all the information out of him because he's not that person.
Well, Frank isn't very trusting. And I think what's remarkable is that he does eventually trust enough, and a couple other guys enough, to bring them in on it, mostly because they have advantageous access to certain parts of the prison or have skills that he can use. He doesn't just blindly bringing them in because he's loyal to these guys he just met. He selectively chooses a couple of guys who he thinks can help him with this scheme. And I do like what you're saying about how the film watches Frank's plan. He's not a genius, right? It's like he doesn't arrive like, with a completely thought out, beautiful mind plan already in his head. Like, he figures it out. And part of what we're doing is we're watching him figure it out in real time. This isn't a heist picture, because in a heist picture, they would explain the heist beforehand, lay it all out. put the team together, explain what their plan is, and
I
then we
mean,
watch the plan go off the rails.
You
In this,
do sort of get that eventually in the second half of the film. You have to understand what they're trying to do because it's a setting that you haven't been to before.
right?
And it's so cool when he does finally get into in between the walls
Mhm.
because I fully just did not understand how the fuck this man was going to get out of here. He doesn't either. That's
Right.
the secret. He's like, I just have to take it step by step. And so he like does each section of this escape like a little bit more than the last time.
Mhm.
And then finally, once they figure out, all right, this is how we get over a wall or whatever,
Mhm.
then they finally do all that. And of course, there's always like a fucking prison guard, like
Happens to be
stepping
there.
to echoey steps like 50 feet behind them.
Well, and that's where the setting works great because this is kind of like an older prison. It isn't like an especially modern prison, even for 1979.
Yeah.
It looks like, it's set in 1960, but it looks like it could be set in
It looks older.
1940. And that like brutalist concrete and that ringing sound of the guard's feet slapping it, and the way that the steel of everything, during a lockdown groans, everything sounds a little bit groany and rusty. It feels like an old brutal place. It feels like a dungeon in like the medieval sense. It doesn't feel like a modern institution. It feels like a dungeon.
Now, I might push back on a little bit of that. It is just like exclusively about him planning because really the first hour of this is getting to know other inmates.
Right.
And they are like capital C characters. You've got an old man
Archetypes,
who paints.
yeah.
you
Archetypes,
got an old man who paints. You have a black librarian who there's some things in here that some race elements, some dropping the soap shit. There's like it steps into these things and you get the idea that this Frank is probably like a terrible racist, like a terrible bigot who's really smart at, on the street. And he approaches these things, but once he comes like behind prison doors, there's a great equalizer.
Mhm.
And so he has to navigate the social structure of this prison in order to plan this, and only involves the people who he's formed a relationship with, or like you said, they have some form of currency, whether that's talent or access, in order to pull this off. I love this scene where Frank goes out on the court and there are like 20 or 30 black men on the steps, and he goes and sits down and they're like, hey, what are you doing? And he doesn't understand, or maybe he does, that there's racial segregation happening, but there's also like a power echelon happening there. Like,
yeah, it's a great visual. It's a great visual.
It really is.
Because at first glance, these are just guys sort of sprinkled randomly on this sort of almost like a wedge of stairs up in the courtyard. It's this nice visual. Again, not a film with a ton of like stunning visuals, but it's a great image. And then sort of English at the top, right. And the way that initially it looks like they're just sort of randomly sitting in places, but reality is what we can't see, and that Frank doesn't necessarily know, or maybe he does, is that there's a hidden hierarchy embedded in exactly where every man is sitting on those tiers.
And the game that the man at the top kind of plays with them, he because Frank gets up when he learns about the hierarchy happening, he says, there's either two possibilities. You don't like me because I'm black, or you're afraid of sitting next to me. And Frank has an interesting reaction to it that is sort of played for comedy, because it's like, how fucking dare he say something like that to that man? That just shows how incredibly bold he is. Or there's a possibility again that he's pointing towards this equalization of being behind bars, which is, I'm not saying that is like true to life at all, but that's how he moves through this system.
A lot of those moments with those other characters are really there to I would argue, to establish Frank's character in relation. Again, and it works because they're sort of all sort of archetypical, archetypal. Frank's relationship. So we know, like, we learn that Frank is savvy enough about navigating the racial hierarchy behind bars to provoke, but not provoke too much. So it tells us something about his savviness, and that he's willing to sit down with a black man that he maybe wouldn't sit down with in the quote unquote real world in order to accomplish his goals. He gets affectionate for the old man who paints and becomes protective of him. So that tells us, it makes us sympathetic towards Frank. We know that as much of a hard ass as he is, he has a soft side. He has a sympathetic side. He feels protective of this older guy. So all those, and it fun to me that every aspect of his interaction with other characters sort of builds. I don't want to say, and I don't want to pretend that this is a character study, but it's important. There are elements that are important for us to A, believe he's the kind of guy who could pull this off, and also B, to keep us broadly sympathetic with a guy who we know for a fact is a convicted federal prisoner. Like, we have to remain somewhat sympathetic to his plight.
Right. It's the difference. Well, there's quite a bit of difference between Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped, which is like,
which we need to talk about.
Yes, which is like what this is built upon, because that is like bare bones miracle cinema to me. That's one of my favorite movies. I think that's one of the greatest movies, and it might be his best, which I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say. I feel like maybe that's like a zodiac chart, like which Bresson is your favorite. But A Man Escaped, like, that prisoner is a resistance fighter. So you have ultimate sympathy for him. So this one's a little, a little bit askew from that, because what sympathy should you have for him? That's the interesting thing. But
the sympathy is that he is Clint Eastwood and he's trying to get out of prison.
That's it. It is using a star persona to just incredible benefit, but it is playing with it too, with the sort of conservatism that Eastwood is synonymous with.
Well, but conservatism, but also, I think part of what the role that Frank fills in this narrative is that he's I don't even want to call him a rebel, but he is a rebel, but he's really the anti-reactionary, the anti-authoritarian force. The analogy that I make to this film, and I do want to get back to talk about Man Escapes in the context of Tarantino's comments, but the analogy that I sort of use for this film is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Sure.
Because good film, justly adored, but I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is not a film with deep thoughts or political commentary on the mental health system in the United States.
No, that film is a metaphor.
Right. Metaphor, or just choosing to couch, Jack Nicholson's resistance to, and then eventual plan for an escape, which he, of course, doesn't actually pull off by the end of the movie, and somebody else sort of becomes his proxy. But his resistance in that film is not really about, the complicated politics and ethics and medicine of the mental health care in the United States. It's about him butting heads against authority.
Us versus them.
Right. And I think this film is filling a similar role. Part of why we don't get anything about Frank out in the outside world is it's not relevant to what this film is doing. It's about Frank deciding that he's not going to allow somebody to cage him in that sort of very primal way, and he's determined to get out. We haven't mentioned yet, the warden is played by the great Patrick McGoohan. A little bit of like meta-ness there, right? Because he's famously from the late 1960s show The Prisoner. Now he's playing the warden. But his role in this film, he's good in it, and he's almost like cartoonishly uptight and evil. But his role is just like Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. His purpose is not to be a realistic character with goals and motives and drives. His purpose is to be the brick wall through which the protagonist has to puncture through, the thing that's the iron glove that they're resisting, that the protagonist is resisting.
But it's interesting you bring up the rebel thing, because he's also sort of the impetus to put the plan in motion proper whenever he does what he does to, I forget what that old man painter's name is, when he finds a portrait of him and takes away his, when he figures out what happens to Doc, or when he does what he does to Doc, and then finds a chrysanthemum. I think it is chrysanthemum would make sense
Yeah.
if you're being cute and symbolic, and crushes it in the middle of the cafeteria, and that seems to for Clint Eastwood to say, "All right, let's go, like, let's get
Right.
this motherfucker." But it is interesting because this is like the Hollywood genre film version of A Man Escaped.
Right.
But you said there you had Tarantino arguments about it. I don't remember Tarantino bringing.
Not arguments. No, in fact, him not bringing it up was my sort of critique of his critique. So he uses, what's interesting about Tarantino's chapter on this, I think it comes late-ish in the book.
It's one of the later, it might be the penultimate film title chapters.
I think Funhouse comes after that.
Funhouse is last, yeah.
His discussion of it is really, he's using Escape from Alcatraz as a vehicle to discuss the collaborations between Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood, to sort of look back, because earlier in the book, he does talk about Dirty Harry specifically. He devotes a chapter to Dirty Harry. So those kind of like bookend the decade for him, and he's using Man Escape to talk about, you know, their productiveness of their collaboration and what works and doesn't work.
Escape from Alcatraz.
Yeah. So, sorry, Escape from Alcatraz. I'm not a huge fan. I do like this film a lot. I'm not a huge fan as Dirty Harry as Tarantino is.
No, me neither. I actually did not like it. I watched it for the first time for this as well. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. He is right in that Andrew Robinson's like completely unhinged performance might be the most interesting thing about the movie. I actually like it a lot because it's
compelling.
It's so all over the place. But no, it's a well-made film. I'm not as over the moon for it as some people are. Even as a genre work, I'm not that crazy about it. But this movie I like a lot. But one of the things that's remarkable is that, you know, Tarantino uses this to discuss the director and the actor, but he doesn't really talk about what the film's place in history is, or what it's doing, and what its influences might be. And I think that, like, the first thing that came to mind was Man Escaped, and to a degree. A film that doesn't get as discussed as much is Jacques Becker's The Hole, which is a film I absolutely love. But those feel like, you know, Man Escape from 1956, The Hole from 1960. You know, did Don Siegel watch a lot of French cinema? I don't know, but it certainly feels like this movie is happening in the shadow of those two films in particular, because it's doing, like you say, the mainstream studio American version of that template of a ruthlessly processed, focused prison escape picture that begins and ends in prison and doesn't really give us anything else.
Yeah, I found Tarantino's this chapter in his book one of the weakest for film criticism. Like he just says a lot of hyperbolic things about it, that it's like a crackerjack, you know, thriller, and talks about the beginning being among Siegel's most expressive passages or something. There's a lot more about Siegel and Eastwood's relationship in it, and it felt short and light on kind of everything. It felt very basic to me, especially because he really gets into some Tarantinian. Is that really the thing? Tarantinian sounds
Tarantino-esque, Tarantinoian,
no, Quentin things in the Dirty Harry chapter that he might be right about the film. I don't really care if he is, because I really didn't like that movie, and he seems to be excited about quite a few things in it. But it's just not there for Escape from Alcatraz, which again, I'm more interested in for Tarantino, someone who I love for his structure and the way that he builds suspense, to talk about the way this film is made and the way it is the way it unfolds, especially when he says how great it is. I think this is one of the films in all of cinema speculation that he really doesn't have anything negative to say about.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, this is one thing that I've sort of learned, and this book has sort of just solidified it for me. It's that one thing that you're never going to get with Tarantino is maybe a deep explanation of how he thinks about like his own craft. Like he doesn't really discuss his own thought process in his own craft. I mean, he's a very vulnerable guy. He talks about a lot of stuff. He talks about things that he's passionate about. He talks about, you know, the ups and downs of the industry, but he doesn't talk about, you know, again, let me put it this way. This is a movie where, like, I feel like the guy who created the opening 10 minutes of Inglourious Basterds should have something to say about this movie that's more substantive than just, wasn't this a great movie? Like, he knows how to do, like you say, he is like maybe one of our great purveyors of sort of pop tension, pop thriller sequences, like just endlessly ratcheting up tension, and he's so good at it. But I wonder if he can explain it. Like maybe he operates in a sort of David Lynch completely intuitive way, and he couldn't articulate it if you put a gun to his head how he does it.
And I don't need him to, you know, but if he's writing a book about a film criticism book, right. I want him to talk about Escape from Alcatraz and why it works, not just say that it does work. You know, that's what we fight against all the time.
And exactly as you say, he has some of those really trenchant insights about other films in the book, maybe just not this way. I just think he put it in as a bookend to Dirty Harry. I think that's really its function.
And it makes sense. So let me, we don't have to go so far down this track, but does it reveal to you that Quentin Tarantino, because of his encyclopedic knowledge and his incredible memory, it seems, of film, that Tarantino is, as Catherine put in her, Catherine Coldiron, the guest on our previous episode, in her Kill Bill essay, that he's a great mixtape artist, meaning that he has ingrained in his memory all of these great films that he is then able to just use and weaponize them, and doesn't really understand why he does the things he does, because he is working from a sort of intuition. This is the question for people with imposter syndrome. It's just like that I think about all the time. Have I just read good film critics and therefore I know, you know, what is a good opinion? Like, it's just something that racks my brain all the time, because I've always thought of Tarantino saying the stupidest shit and me having the most thrilling experiences in his films. Someone who kicked open a lot of doors in my mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that he is more than, and I don't think this necessarily contradicts what Catherine said, I think of him as more than a sort of pastiche artist, certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, how do you look at, again, something like that opening of Inglourious Basterds, or the entire, like, Brad Pitt arrives at the Spawn Ranch sequence in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Like, how do you look at that and see somebody who's like only doing homages and lifts from other movies? He's clearly knows how to structure shots and camera movements and like edit to create certain effects, but could he explain it? Does he have anything to say beyond being exceptionally great at that? I don't know. I mean, but I'm like you. I think he's like one of the greatest living guys to do it. But it's a weird. He's a difficult guy to love because of that, because of the things he says outside the text and his personality and the things that he has done. Like, he's maybe a hard director to unreservedly love. But maybe we don't need to. You know, this goes back to maybe a lighter version of art versus artist and the conversation we've all been embroiled with for the last 20 years. Like, maybe it isn't important that we love Tarantino, the guy, and just focus on what he's doing with his work. But this book suggests, you know, that he thinks he has things to say about cinema in from a maybe not directly film critic mode, but a film critic-esque position. And again, sometimes he's very insightful, sometimes he's just kind of blah.
Yeah. It is interesting to read this after having read the novelization, quote unquote, of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a book that I thought it's an interesting middle between cinema speculation and watching the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because languorous, like very relaxed, dialogue filled scenes from Tarantino, who has like makes films based upon this rhythm that he has in his brain that is to me really adventurous, is and will stretch those things to its breaking limit. And that's been a criticism, I think, from the very beginning of him being a rambly filmmaker, like I'm rambling now. But and then in the book Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, being someone who is fucking rambling forever, but in that Tarantino prose, he's still writing as the narrator of one of his films and has the same dialogue of the characters, even though some of the setups are different. And then this, Tarantino's shooting from the hip. I don't think he sat and scribbled this on one of his notepads. This sounds like he recorded it into a tape recorder. And I say that because the prose isn't there, the interest in language isn't there. I mean, he just says this movie kicks ass. Like, this movie kicks ass, just like that. So it's interesting to meet him in the middle between those things. All of this.
Again, the tell for me is that he just simply doesn't even name drop Man Escaped or The Hole as as influences on this, or as being part of the same genetic code as this. And I feel like that's a huge, if you can go for 1,000 words and not bring up either of those movies when talking about Escape from Alcatraz, I don't know, like, is what you're doing really criticism?
Yeah, I guess not.
And I don't mean to sound, that sounds arrogant when I say that, but I mean it in the truest sense. Like, you have to see like, if you've seen Man Escaped and you've seen this movie, the through line, like, it's obvious.
Well, you would expect that from Tarantino because he's the ultimate cinephile director, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if he isn't, if we think him as someone better than being just making mixtapes, and to Catherine's credit, she's a lot more nuanced in that than just that criticism.
But he has that Scorsese. He has the sort of grindhouse version of that Scorsese library in his brain that he can he could, if you ask him for a recommendation, he could name 60 movies in 60 seconds.
Maybe he just hasn't seen A Man Escaped. He's very busy watching like Chung Chur films, and I don't know.
Eaten Alive.
Yeah, Eaten Alive. That'll be our next one. All right. Any other thoughts on Escape from Alcatraz?
No, I mean, ultimately, he's right. This is an awesome movie, and I feel like this
movie does kick ass.
This movie does kick ass.
He was right. Yeah,
I do feel like it's a sort of essential. Well, maybe not essential, but like core. What I think in another era might have been regarded as a B picture. Sure. Like, take it back 20 years, 30 years, it would have been a B picture. But the combination of sort of Siegel as a veteran at this point, really knowing what he's doing, Eastwood's star power and presence, and again, the sort of resolute focus of it with a big production values, I feel like it becomes sort of the best version of itself. This is like I don't know what I would change about this movie. It's pretty aces.
One thing.
Mm-hmm.
The paper mache heads.
They look bad, yes. But maybe the standards are different.
Like, they look fine. They're paper mache heads that a prisoner would make.
Right.
But come on. I don't know that I would. I mean, those prison guards are pretty stupid.
But that's true. That is one aspect of the truth. That is one aspect of the true story that is absolutely true. They made paper mache heads and it fooled the guards.
That is so crazy to me. Paper mache heads, those things look scary as fuck. They look like Charlie, what's this? The ventriloquist. They're in an uncanny valley, certainly.
Looks scary.
And that he's collecting the hair from all that.
You got to do what you got to do. But it's like, I think the film fudges that a little bit in the sense that it has to be lit in such a way that we the viewers have to be able to see what's going on. But in reality, it was probably much darker and much more like lower visibility, and which is why a guard could walk right past it and not see that it's obviously not that person. But yeah, from that sense, it comes off a lot as like Ferris Bueller using a mannequin and like his parents totally falling for it. Like, really?
Yeah. But I kind of like it. I kind of like it that he is like, so what's ingenuity?
ingenious.
Thank you. Ingenious at looking at these just found materials because that's all he can do, and making a paper mache like grill. Yeah, he's
Wile E. Coyote if he didn't have access to the Acme factory. Like he's just using what materials he has at hand to MacGyver, I guess would be the real comparison.
Does that make McGowan fucking Roadrunner?
Except he wins in the end. Does he win in the end? And that's one thing I do appreciate. The film is the film does leave it ambiguous.
The ambiguous ending, but
yeah.
a lot less ambiguous than what happened in real life, was just like no one could really find anything. There was some evidence found in 2010s that pointed towards that perhaps they did actually escape, but
I think the point is they did escape. Like, let's be clear, they escaped. They might have died on the journey
I should say,
to the mainland or to the nearest island. But like, there's no, to the film's credit, it doesn't include some Batman Returns, Clint Eastwood in a cafe in Paris nonsense. Like, it's just it's McGowan with that fucking flower going, God damn it, they fucking did it.
All right, well, are you ready to talk more about shit Quentin Tarantino says?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm prepared for this.
Let's play a game.
You're making it really hard for to be a Tarantino fan.
I know. Okay, we're gonna play a game. Tarantino quotes. I gotta tell you, I'm tired of talking about Tarantino.
Oh, we got one more episode. We can use the next episode
to talk about with Eaten Alive, and
let's talk about Toby Hooper instead of the next episode.
I like the angle that Quentin Tarantino is talking about Eaten Alive as a formative theatrical viewing experience in the Funhouse chapter. So we can probably focus on that. Maybe we'll talk about our own formative theatrical experiences instead of talking about Quentin Tarantino, which is what we're about to do in this game. It's quoting Tarantino. I guess that's the name of the game now. So what I've done is pulled Quentin Tarantino quotes about film criticism. And then I've pulled other directors' quotes about their films or film criticism.
All right.
So you're going to have to guess, one, is it Tarantino? Two, who do you think it is? Now, the second one, you'll never get. You'll never get. None of these are very obvious. They're all very general, but I think you probably guess from, what we've been talking about is the tenor of Tarantino, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's start. So this person said, if I've made it a little easier for artists to work in violence, great. I've accomplished something. Is that Tarantino or not?
I'm going to say no.
That is definitely Tarantino.
Damn.
Yeah. This is from around the time when Pulp Fiction came out, and a lot of people were talking about how incredibly violent that film is, which it doesn't really portray a lot of blood. I think that's what the kind of system that he actually is up to in that. All right. Next one. The best thing I can think of would be to create a union between something as beautiful and powerful and wonderful as Hollywood films and a criticism of the status quo.
I'm going to say no, because I can't see the word status quo ever leaving Tarantino's lips.
Yes, because he is culturally unaware. I'll finish the quote. That's my dream, to make such a German film. That's Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Definitely not Tarantino.
Question is, did Fassbinder ever do that? I'm not sure that he ever did.
I would argue that he very much did, except maybe they weren't as popular as Hollywood film.
What's his most Hollywood film in style? I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Fassbinder's?
Yeah.
I would say the closest that he came would be The Marriage of Maria Braun. And because it was popular, or it was on the kind of foreign film market in the United States, I mean, it got a best foreign language, as it was called then, nomination, and was a kind of a box office hit. But it is Mildred Pierce as a Germany reconstruction fable.
Mm.
And the three films in the BDR trilogy are probably the closest that he got to something like that as far as budget, and still retaining his critique of culture, which he, and I say retaining, all of his films are very close to that.
He never really sold out. I mean,
And
let's be honest.
he was not a sellout. Let's see if this director was, and if it's Quentin Tarantino, what critics call dirty in our pictures they call lusty in foreign films.
That doesn't sound like Tarantino to me.
No, it's definitely not. It's Billy Wilder, the one of the great horny men. Billy Wilder.
Is that like being a jerk? Is that like being a journeyman, a hornyman?
Because all he did was make movies about fucking. Movies are my religion and God is my patron. I'm lucky enough to be in the position where I don't have to make movies to pay for my pool.
That doesn't sound like Tarantino either.
That is Tarantino.
Really? Tarantino doesn't talk about God that much.
Yeah. Only God in cinephilic terms.
Yeah. I think his God is like, in his mind's eye, is like the head, the giant Revenge of the Giant Head, a silver screen burning, laughing at him.
It's the Zardoz head.
Yeah. Speaking of John
all right,
Boorman.
Here's another one. It's hard to see a film one time and really get it and write fully and intelligently about it. That's a review. That's not film criticism.
Man, these are hard. I feel like I'm whiffing on one of these. I'm going to say that is him.
That's Richard Linklater. Something that I think we would all agree about. I guess Pauline Kael wouldn't agree.
Yeah, I was going to say
one-timer.
I was going to say Tarantino feels like a guy who watches movies over and over and over again. So
his letterbox would be all circles.
I've seen it. I don't care.
Yeah. Here's another one. I don't want to be a part of the demographics. I want to be an individual. I wear each of my films as a badge of pride. That's why I cherish all my bad reviews. If the critics start liking my movies, then I'm in deep trouble.
That could be him, but that sounds maybe like John Waters.
You're so close. That's John Carpenter.
Okay.
I thought the giveaway on there would be that, like, cherish all my bad reviews. People like him.
I think Tarantino has talked about that as well, though, that he does read his bad reviews and like tries to absorb what they say.
Yeah. I've come to a point where I like Pauline Kael's reviews of Godard more than Godard's films.
I don't know.
That's definitely Tarantino.
That's Tarantino, yeah.
I remember him doing press. I shouldn't say I remember. I think it's just on the DVD of Pulp Fiction. He has this very long interview and he's talking about Godard. And like when he was a younger person, he responded to Godard and Godard influenced him so much, but him growing out of that. And I'm like, I feel like you only grew into it. And maybe that's the most Godardian thing you can do is growing away from him to grow into it. I don't know. All right. I just have a couple more.
Okay. I'm learning more about my own ignorance than anything else here.
Well, I think I just like them because they're fun quotes. You get to hear about who's like a hard ass and who hates us and not. It's easy. It's so easy to manipulate an audience, but it's not always clear that you're being manipulated. I think that people who are not critically attuned are aware of cynical manipulation in film.
Man, I don't know. I'm gonna guess that is to Tarantino. No,
it is not Tarantino. It's John Boorman. Boorman. All right, one more quote. I guess I'll have to marry Elvis Presley to get even.
What?
I'll just give you
that. Doesn't even make sense to me.
Yeah, the context is that he's talking about Guy Ritchie marrying Madonna.
Okay.
Like. Guy Ritchie marrying Madonna, in Tarantino's mind, he's got to go like 3 more echelons higher, and he's got to marry Elvis Presley.
Dig up his corpse.
Oh my God. What corpse? What do you mean? What do you mean? All right. Well, that was a fun, what did I call it? Quoting Tarantino. And we're on to one more thing. Every episode, we end by giving you one more thing. That's something we've been thinking about, smelling about, touching about,
Smelling.
eating about. It's something, typically watching about. I'm going to go first. My name's Joshua Ray. I'm Crispy Retinas all over social media. Find reviews on thetakeup.com. That's the take-up.com. My one more thing is something that I thought of and now I have forgotten. What was it? Oh, my one more thing is, every July, Barnes & Noble has their Criterion half off sale.
Mhm.
It is
a terrible time for a cinephile.
a terrible time. November, also a terrible time. And, it's just really hard. It's just life is really hard. But one thing I did pick up was their new box set of Bud Bedecker Westerns starring
yeah.
Randolph Scott called the Renown Films, deemed that way in the box because that's the production company that they started in order to make these films. It does not.
5 films?
It's a 5-film set. They made 6 or 7 together. It does not include the film 7 Men from Now, which in my estimation, having watched all of these, is the best thing they made together. That film was made for Warner Brothers, and it was the thing that started their working relationship together. Bud Bedecker, okay, not only are all of these films on Blu-ray and 4K in this set, these are among the best 4K discs I have seen, the best looking 4K films, the best looking films I've ever seen on home media. They look incredible. They look like you can just take globs of them and eat them, and they would be delicious. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't care. It makes sense to me.
It must have been incredible preservation efforts then on this particular 5.
I haven't encountered anything in the box set about the restoration. I mean, they vary in quality, but not much. Like the Tall Tea, the first one, and probably the one people are most familiar with, if they're familiar with these kind of B Westerns, or I should say independently produced Westerns, they vary in quality just by a bit. And we're talking about like levels of grain or levels of depth and clarity or color, just very nerdy things, but they all look gorgeous. They're all under 80 minutes. They're all just not your typical Westerns. They all deal in just vicious masculinity and the fight against that within, a masculine man. And the extras in these, they're really incredible. The very first thing, you're going to love this. The very first thing on this disc is a documentary about Bud Bedecker, who has this just incredible life story and is one of those like Hawksian men who, he was a bullfighter and he was
They all have like a Hemingway biography. It's crazy.
Yes, very Hemingway. The documentary has several more contemporary directors. I think it's probably from the early 2000s, right before Bedecker died, but Tarantino is there talking about Bud Bedecker, thinking I thought he was talking about 7 Men from Now. And then the next talking head you get is Clint Eastwood. And then the camera pulls out and it turns out Eastwood and Tarantino are sitting in the room together talking about Bud Bedecker. How do you like that? Wrapping all this up with a neat bow.
What year, what is the year span for these 5 films?
Oh, they were made just within a 3-year time span and made very cheaply and quickly. But Bedecker was someone who's an autodidact, just kind of snuck into the industry and started writing and started doing assistant directing. He was working with John Ford. And
I think of him as a
multi-hyphenate.
I'm not familiar with him, but I do think of him as like a multi-hyphenate, that he did a lot of different things.
Yeah, he was actually a bullfighter.
I meant in film industry, but yes, okay.
No, I know. And one of the first major things he did was received an Oscar nomination for Blood and Sand, which is the film starring Rita Hayworth and Tyrone Power. We're gonna cut that little space out. No, I'll leave it in. I couldn't think of it, about bullfighting. And just an incredible life that's documented in this box set. But even if you're not interested in the extra textual, these films are great. They're, like I said, lean, mean, and just really beautiful to look at. So that's the Renowned Westerns from Criterion Collection. Well, what about you, Andrew?
I'm going to recommend, so this pivots off my earlier discussion under Now Showing. I mentioned Emmanuel Carrère, who is the director of the new film, Between Two Worlds. Has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, but his last feature film is from 2005, a phenomenal film called The Mustache. Mustache, the American pronunciation, we'd call it the Mustache, but to me that feels like wrong. It's a very French film, so it feels like it should be La Moustache. This is an amazing film that I feel like has been forgotten in some ways. It still seems to be Carrère's most like famous credit, but it's one of those films that just bowled me over, and I revisited it just yesterday to remind myself, was this movie as good as I remember? Oh yeah, it's that good. So for those who aren't familiar, this stars Vincent Lindon of Titan fame, people more recently, Both Sides of the Blade, Claire Denis. But he's been a French actor who's been kind of a face in French cinema for at least a couple decades. The way I would describe this film is it's the premise, the setup is everything. So the premise is Lindon plays this man who just at the very beginning of the movie, impulsively shaves off the mustache that he's worn for several years. And he kind of does this when his wife is out of the house and she comes home and they go out to a friend's house, and the whole time he's sort of waiting for her to comment on the fact that he has shaven the mustache that he has worn for 15 plus years. And she never mentions it. And he finally sort of forces the issue and says, how come you haven't said anything about this? And she says, what are you talking about? You've never had a mustache. Have you seen this movie?
I haven't, but I have heard of it, and I reread your thing on Letterboxd earlier today, and I was like, this sounds made for me.
It's very up here.
Does it play like a Buñuel, or pretty straightforward about the thing?
No, so that's the thing, is that like, so it almost feels like a sitcom, like or a sketch comedy premise or an improv premise even. But from there, it becomes something completely unexpected. It spirals. So Carrère wrote the novel that it is based on, and it has that sense of somebody who knows what he's doing with the material. He's not using this to create sort of David Fincher, The Game conspiracy story about like this guy being battered by forces. From this very simple premise of the wife thinks that he hasn't had a mustache, and then he sort of starts to get agitated by this and go back to other people and say, hey, I'm just gonna, like, this is a weird question, but have I ever had a mustache? And like, no, what are you talking about? And so like the feeling that the unreality of his situation starts expanding beyond the borders of his household, to his friends, to his families, to people he's met only glancingly, to random strangers on the street. And it starts to infect other aspects of his relationship with his wife, where he becomes uncertain about basic facts of his own life and his marriage, and sort of things start to dissolve. It is not presented in any kind of phantasmagorical David Lynchian way. I think part of what makes it work is it's all very sort of cold, very Michael Haneke, very cold, sort of precise French filmmaking with some interesting stylistic flourishes. But there's nothing here that really suggests that this is like a dream world or anything. It's just cause and effect start to completely break down at some point, and identity starts to break down. And so if you are a person who needs like really satisfying explanations and everything to be tied up in a neat bow and all the ambiguities to be resolved, at least to be sussed out into a very clear singular metaphor. If you like the idea of Vincent Lindon's just sort of discovering that he can't trust anything, and that his whole life maybe like, I don't know whether this movie is supposed to be about a conspiracy. Is it like, sometimes it has some like echoes of the recent film The Father with Anthony Hopkins, who won an Oscar for it, where this like, it does maybe I'm watching a first person view of dementia, a man going sort of middle-aged dementia. Maybe this is about midlife crisis and masculinity. I don't know. Like, I don't even have a theory. I've seen this film twice now. I don't even have a theory for it. I just know that it's incredibly compelling. It's really excellent, and ends on a great note of like complete, we're not going to explain anything to you. You're just going to have to sit with this movie, which I feel like I knew. And if you haven't seen this movie, I feel like it's your sort of thing.
Yeah, it does It does seem like my sort of thing. Like I'm getting a lot of Headless Woman,
Yeah.
Boonwell stuff from it, but I'm down to play that straight to yeah, it sounds
It's
like my
wide,
thing. It's what I'm
and
going to be watching.
surprisingly for a film, from 20 years ago that has largely been forgotten, unfortunately, it seems to be widely available. It's not the best version out there. I do wish somebody would go back and do a nice clean 4K
You
restoration.
can't tell me 2004 was 20 years ago.
It was almost 3 years ago. But it is widely
Jesus.
available. This is streaming on Prime. It's streaming on Movie. You can pretty much rent it
very cool.
from anywhere for $3 if you don't have it streaming. So the availability is good. So I do encourage you to go out and catch it if you can.
All right. And where can the people find your mustache?
You can find me. I don't have. What are you talking about?
Yes, you do. See, what if we did the opposite? Wouldn't that be fun?
Don't start gaslighting me, Josh, please. I got enough people doing that in my life. You can find me at AWyatt76 on Letterboxd right now. And also you can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, a couple other places.
Blue Sky or Blue Ski?
Blue Sky? I say Blue Sky.
In my head, it's Blue Ski, and that's fun. Also, if you get an invite, just let me know. Andrew,
Blue Ski sounds like
an
innuendo. Like, I'm going to give you a blue ski.
I gave him a blue ski. And yeah, if you want hardcore cultural criticism like that, follow the Take Up STL. All right, we've got one more episode in the cinema speculation program, and we're never talking about Quentin Tarantino again. I haven't watched any of his movies again during this. I mean, I know all of them very well, but I haven't had the desire to do that, which is surprising because I feel like I always am watching a Tarantino.
No, I feel like this is if anything, this is sort of a good time to take a step back and look at his influences, maybe more than his stuff. Maybe go back and revisit them later to see, oh, now I get it. I think some of our guests have mentioned, Cliff and Catherine maybe have mentioned that, is that this is some ways cinema speculation functions as a Rosetta Stone for understanding some of his later films.
So I think that might be right. Well, we're going to talk about a very early experience he had watching Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive. It's from the Funhouse chapter. I don't love the Funhouse. I'm going to rewatch it. I haven't rewatched it yet. Yeah. I hope y'all love some gator fun. I know it's on Shudder. I think it's on Amazon Prime right now. You can get it. You can get it. And maybe you don't even need to. If you don't feel like watching gator fun, you don't have to.
We're going to hillbilly exploitation and killer gators.
Exploitation. We're talking about Tobe Hooper. I'm going to bust out my new 4Ks of both Hooper Texas Chainsaw Massacres, the original, and the wildly underrated second film. One of my favorite.
Is it though?
One of my favorite horror films. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I can already tell we're going to get into it.
We're going to get into it.
Yeah. So that'll be here.
Good ending. I'm not sure about the rest of the movie.
Chilly. Till then, I just want to thank our partners at Cinema St. Louis, Jessica Pierce, our editor, our social media manager, Kayla McCullough. We're going to get her butt on here again soon, right? Yeah. But until then, after a while, crocodiles, see you later, alligators.